Pressure, I suggest, could mean things that would turn into a new explanation, because take it the other way, for ordinary people to believe that they were being driven in some way insane, if not enough to be taken out of the general population, at least enough to need treatment, counseling, being neurotic, having to take drugs or alcohol, what would they attribute it to normally? Public pressure. Now, that might not be the first words that came to their mind. They might say, well, my poor social life, family pressures, my rotten childhood. But what are they saying? The pressures of civilization, the pressures of family life, the pressures of school, the pressures of my employment, public pressure. But note, since I say it's a different explanation, I'm not using any strange words, it's not becoming absolutely insane. But notice it's an explanation from another view that I'm pointing out that contrary to the minority, and it is a minority of people who feel as though they are insane or who other people feel like are insane or unsocial to the point of being criminal. So what's left with the minority? I mean the majority of people. That's never pointed out. The majority of people is just what I described. They are indeed held sane by public pressure. Well, should be better than, deserves better than just one Well, on the basis of nothing else, that you are, me bringing up the idea that there's more than one explanation, that there's always another one. Always, always, always. For physical, for mathematical reasons. But there is always another explanation, and this is just one of the examples that you can take, even though my first example of how the ordinary would take my example, they would not necessarily pick out those words to use, but they would readily agree that in general that they could accept my term that public pressure, and then they would say, yes, public pressure is what causes stress, what causes personal problems, which causes all forms of neuroses, if not psychoses, and etc. And yet another explanation does not belie that one, does not argue the fact. It just simply goes in another direction. I know it seems to be in the opposite direction, sort of, but it's not. I know it seems to be, but it's not just the opposite direction, because if it's the opposite direction, somebody would have already thought of it. That is, somebody ordinary would go, oh no. They would say public pressure doesn't cause people to be insane, but see, what they think the opposite of that is private pressure. But nobody out in the general population would ever come up with the idea, if it was announced, public pressure causes insanity. And they go, yes. All forms of neuroses and personal psychological, never go yes. The opposite of that, if someone did stand up, would not be what I'm pointing out. They would stand up and say, no, it's not. That's the opposite. But they would never come and say, nah, no, it's not. And to them the opposite be, no, it's not, you're wrong, because what public pressure causes is sanity. See it? Well, that's what makes it more and more fun, and that's why sometimes I try to use terms not just to be cute of independent thinking, nonpartisan thinking, and it would be easy for another ordinary person to hear that and go, well, what a bunch of crap, what a bunch of, pretentious hogwash, that I think I probably have a better education than the people up there talking. Yeah, probably. But thinking is to where something seems to be a reasonable, an acceptable statement, an explanation of reality of some aspect, and yet you can look at it and it's beyond just the opposite being true, that is what's collectively assumed to be a fair statement of reality, not that it's just wrong and the other side's true. As always, the words are always close, or else I couldn't use them. I'd have to start making up some kind of mystical mumbo-jumbo. But who in the general, sane, middle of the city would ever think public pressure causes, and people be waiting, yes? Public pressure, it just struck me, causes, and the crowd waits, yes, yes, sanity. You want to try it one more way for you, those of you who still like myth? Some of you, I'm not sure you like myths, or whether you just have a speech impediment and I don't understand it. How about back to one of the nice Western stories, the myths of man's birth into the civilized, that is, thinking world, the expulsion from the garden. Look at it this way. In the garden was just Ken and Barbie, Bruce and Sam, Adam and Eve, whoever it was, Moses and his agent. That's another story I don't want to go into, but he was the first man that knew how the external world actually worked. But it was two people in the garden. According to the story, of course, it's supposed to be three people, two people, and then some cosmic force, which, of course, is the third explanation. That was not enough people. Not once Adam and Eve got their intellect fired up. Because once their intellect got fired up, then they had the possibility of being sane or insane. But until you can talk, you can't be insane. There's no such thing as an insane otter. Well, now I know, if you're foolish enough to stick one in your pocket and try to carry it home, especially if you're a man, maybe you may think later that the otter went insane, but contrary, I must suggest that you weren't completely within your turban wasn't tied real tight at the time, and you would not have put an otter in your pocket. But animals do not go insane. You have to be able to talk for there to be the possibility of being sane. And of course, that's to be the possibility of being sane, to be the possibility of being insane. Back to the story. Being in that limited environment of the garden, paradise, place of no effort, that is, a place where you didn't have to talk, that was not enough pressure. Of course, ordinary people, I guess, could say, wait a minute, God was there. That's all kinds of pressure. See, if they were actually onto something that was physically meaningful, they would realize, wait a minute, the story won't fly that way. Because if it was the ultimate cosmic force there with them, he could have done a better job, or she, or it. It was just him against two humans. And he still couldn't control them. He had to say, well, get out of here. I mean, it was... We talk about omnipotence and omnipresence. I mean, we're talking about a heavy-duty cosmic God that he creates two little humans. He created them, according to the story. And first thing happens, they're out of control. Not only that... Not only is that sort of, I guess, humorous enough, but see, on top of that, he had to think, well, let's see, what'll I do? Being Robert, I guess the prototype for Robert Young, or Father Knows Best, or Dr. Spock, the original Dr. Spock. I mean, here it is, this supreme being. He goes, well, they got it at hand. Let's see, what'll I do? How'll I handle this? So, he had a deep psychological insight, knowing how to handle human nature. Since he made them, he went, get out of here! Well, the same thing any wise parent would probably do today. Parent that has a degree in psychology, reads books on parenting, and then one day their child, they find that dope in their room, or condoms that glow in the dark or something. And the parent thinks, now, all of my training, all this time getting ready for this day when I can actually be of some psychological help and support to my child, it'll finally pay off. And they ponder the matter and go into the room and say, get out of here. See? Back to what the reason I stopped it. Do you understand from one view, beyond all of that, they had to be thrown out for there to be public pressure, for them to have the possibility of being sane. There was not enough pressure there. If there had been, they wouldn't have fucked up, screwed up. So. It is public pressure that keeps people sane, except since the majority is sane by their own definition, not mine. Whatever the majority right now says is sane, hey, it's sane. And you're insane to go tell them that that's not true, and they know it. Because if you say, no, you people are wrong, and the city says, you mean all of us? Well, yes, more or less. And the city says, we're wrong and you're right. And you go, uh-oh, if you got any sense, you think, I've probably gone too far. And that's when behind their back, the city starts making signals to the people in charge of the city funny farm. Somebody come get this person. It is sanity held together by pressure. And since they're in the majority, nobody looks at that as being an anomaly. Just the opposite, those who are not sane are anomalous. But from one view, it is the sane who are an anomaly, because if you take away the public pleasure, they'd be as nuts as everybody else. That's why they have to have public pressure. That's why we have civilization. That's why the really sane, as I was pointing out before, are not actually held in check by fear of physical retribution, of just fines and jail. I mean, although that's enough, I guess, for some. What I'm saying is, for the ordinary, for the majority, is public pressure. It's invisible restraints.
An uncivilized man is a naked wild beast. A civilized one is a grizzly bear in a tuxedo. A thinking man, while formally dressed, is in fact naked all over again underneath all the fashionable clothes and fancy hairdos.
Well, oh, all right. Consider it. Besides the little humor that the first few lines stirred up, I was pointing out the two obvious, using our descriptions, that an uncivilized man, that is a man who is not talking, if there was such a thing, or if we're talking about a child, down to the survival level where speech is not required. At that level, man is a beast, or was a beast. But then to be civilized, the picturization was, then we have not simply a naked wild beast, we now have a grizzly bear in a tuxedo. Which I noticed the first time around, got a few chuckles, like, well, still a wild beast, but no longer naked. Not just figuratively, but he now has a civil suit on. But then it points out a third possibility, which is what everyone is trying to do, even those grizzly bears in tuxedos. They're not absolutely too sane. Even they're trying to do it indirectly, and people who are interested in stuff like this are doing it a little more directly. The point is, now you're no longer a naked beast. You're civilized enough that you reach this place in life, and you're not in jail, and I assume most of you are not under weekend custodial care by some. Sanitarium is what they used to call it for you. That was the euphemism for you younger people. I know now it probably means something else, but it was used to that your aunt or your Uncle Fred had to, he's away in a sanitarium. You'd say it in front of the children, because back then it could also mean that you had TB or, the sanitarium was. So we'll assume that you're not just out on weekend passes showing up here, that you're actually free, that you've made it this far, you've fooled them this far. The description was that now, underneath all the fancy hairdos, all the fashionable clothes, which is pointing out that you are civilized enough to get by, is underneath, you are naked all over again. If you were so crude as to be crude, if you were so ordinary as to be ordinary, I guess your little brain could say, well, hell, underneath their clothes, everybody's naked. Nah, not the civilized. You got to be naked under the civilized clothes. And it's not natural. Once you put on the clothes, you're no longer naked. Which any of you who want to consider some of the Hindu and even Christian, back to those stories again. The whole idea is that one time people were naked and then something happened. And once it happens, you can't ever become naked again at the ordinary level. If you do, the city will step all over you. That is, if you once become civilized, you become a warthog in a tuxedo, and get your hair done back. I guess a warthog wouldn't look that. Get his hair, those whiskers, do them up in a handlebar mustache maybe. Once you do that and you put on a tuxedo, you can't ever take it off. Now you can try, but if you try, you have then crossed over the bounds of being civilized. You will indeed end up in direct conflict with the city, with civilization. That is, you'll become irrational, you'll become intolerable in an intellectual manner, or you will become criminal in your behavior. That's what happens if you try indeed to throw off the shackles, the tuxedo. If you try to mousse up your hair, not mousse up, mess up your hair after it's been moussed up. If you try to back up at that level, the city, now if you're just one person, you just do it a little, they'll let it go. You just end up maybe a street person or a hermit, or you'll become the eccentric Uncle Fred in your family. And they'll talk about you instead of us talking about your Uncle Fred. You'll become your own Uncle Fred. But you can't actually do it to any profit. You understand? You cannot take back off your clothes. You cannot become de-civilized. You have to become almost, I've described other ways, civilized in another sense, in another level. Or put this way, you have to then become naked all over again underneath your clothes, which is not natural. Is that the sound of somebody? No. Go ahead.
A thinker's dress for dance dictum. If you don't strip down, you can't get down.
I have a comment. Who's the director? Too late now.
More conspiracy news. If there is one, it does not involve the rich against everyone else, but rather everyone else and those so rich that you've never even heard of them. Same with the intellectual version.
Can't resist. One more time, since everybody always finds this of interest, I shouldn't even bother to make any offhand apology. Since everyone loves the idea of conspiracies, and I've described it in several ways, at least the opening to this. Try it. This one started off about money rather than just power, political intrigue. And it said that if there is a conspiracy, that there is some group of people actually running the world, that it's not simply the rich against everyone else. We'll consider that we're everyone else. Because if that be true, then the ones who are so rich that they're running the world, they're so rich, you never the hell heard of them. You're not about to hear of them. And then consider the dunderheadedness, the Philistine, inverted jockstrap brain it takes for a man in Mississippi, in Alabama, in New Jersey, especially a guy maybe his cousin, and no matter how hard they tried, they cannot get drunk enough to believe that a UFO came to visit them. Or they've tried it and the papers won't even pick it up. So then they have to consider, well, what could we do next? Then if they stumble around long enough, they'll come up with the idea of, wait, let's come up with a new theory about. Has anybody talked about, especially if they're around the New England states, I said Jersey. Let's say that one of them asked the other one, has anyone come up with a whole new book or a new article? Book would be better, it pays more. About the DuPonts are actually running the world, and about how chemicals, when they introduced them in World War I, and what's happened to the petroleum running the world and the damage it's done, his brother goes, I don't think so. And so they give that a shot again. And if it's just semi-literate, somebody will buy the damn thing. Why? Back to the conspiracy, that there is a group. There are two things, again, that's meaningful if you begin to think along these lines, not of conspiracies, but along the lines of always another explanation. As the first one is, it should always be there. If there is a conspiracy and you're not part of it, then you're too stupid or you don't have enough information to ever catch on. Now all it takes is, all you have to do is have walking around, warm weather, high 2-digit IQ, to get a glimpse of that. That, all right, if there is a conspiracy, if there is indeed a group of people, 50, 5,000, or any group, that they are so powerful, they're so rich is all it takes, that they own so much of the resources, they are just so rich, that they actually run everything. They control elections, they don't care who's in office, they don't care whether Republicans or Democrats get elected, or if it gets too one-sided, they may actually step in and change it. But it does not make one whit of difference to them, or who's in charge, who's the Prime Minister of France, whether it's a socialist, or a Democrat, or a communist. Nothing. They own them all. They can bring down the government tomorrow, and you think, that's got to be true, it's got to be true. Even if it's true, here's the thing, all of these stories, no matter which ones they were, no matter what you ever read, you got to remember this. Even if the conspiracy is a fact, you're so far removed from it. When I say you, everybody else says the conspirators and us. I'd already made up a kind of an obscene version, but never mind. There's the conspirators and then there's the rest of us. If the conspirators are that big, then any idea you and anyone else has about who they are It's just insanity. We'll put it this way. If those stories are true, let me put it to you directly, then what I just said, such as the President of the United States, the Premier of France, especially the Prime Ministers of Italy, if you want to really get ridiculous, would you consider this, not necessarily all the time, but would you consider the possibility, if there is such a conspiracy, that some of these guys actually get into office and they don't know about it, that they were put there by the conspiracy, supported, and when they get tired of them or decide it's time for a change, or somebody just decides they don't like his looks, he's dead meat, and they never know it, that they actually think they got elected, or they think, worse than that, they think it was their intelligence or their charm that put them there. If they don't know any better, which I'm just giving you a possibility, if they don't know any better, how do you figure these guys in Oklahoma City, defrocked Church of God ministers, or somebody on the other side, that they alone sit down in their room over unlimited supplies of coffee and PBR, and that they figure out the conspiracy, right? That's the one part. The other part is why no one takes the conspiracy into the level, of course I'm asking you rhetorically because we know why everyone else doesn't, but why you did not even think about the ideas of conspiracy on the basis of the laws of physics. Well, I'm glad I did that. I started to work up to it as always. I started to jump on institutions of all sorts, collective wisdom, reality itself, because if there's a conspiracy, if you think it's just money and politics, you're still on the playground because it's reality. And notice nobody ever accuses that. Nobody ever says, well, wait a minute, I believe there is a conspiracy. Of course, ordinary people, when I say I skip institutions, they don't even go as far as to go, wait a minute, the whole idea of God's a conspiracy. It just doesn't sound right, does it? I mean, to ordinary people. But if there is a conspiracy, God's it. The rest of these people are pikers. Fourth flushers, for you gamblers. Gate crashers. Pea-brains. Pretenders to a non-existent throne. They never see that reality as man conceives of it. I don't mean now the insane people, the majority. Those who believe that the world is a fair game. Those who believe that elections are not rigged. Those who believe that yes, you can get ahead. There's no limit, at least in our part of the world, in a free country, there's no limit to what a man can do. To how rich he can get. There's no limit. Those who believe that never see that if there's a conspiracy, because some of those same people still buy into and passing ideas of a conspiracy, but they don't see if there's a conspiracy. Never mind all this stuff about a group of bankers that at least they used to hang out around Beirut until that recent unpleasantness. They're no longer there. That's not even the problem. They never look around and go, wait, if there's a conspiracy, I'm surrounded by it. And its first name is not Oscar. And this last name is not Meyer. Its first and last name is reality or reality.
Anything you can...
Wait, one more. I was going to wrap up. Back to the idea that reality would be the ultimate conspiracy. If you see that, then you see, like I said, you should have got this other part easily enough, that if indeed there were a common physical conspiracy, such as a group of rich people that own so much of the world under all kinds of guises and holding companies that you can't even trace them down. You never even heard of them. That the ones you hear about are nobody. The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds or whoever's the richest now, those people run errands for these other group. I mean, actually run errands. And it's actually worse than that. I'm not just being insulting. It's worse than running errands. This other group is so rich that they make these guys stand out in public and be seen. They make them the sitting ducks. And they got no choice. If that all be true, what I was getting at, and you see that beyond all that, well, even if that was true, and you see beyond all that, well, that means nothing. Because we're talking about reality. Is the conspirator. That is the ultimate conspiracy. Then do you see, jumping back to this one to compare it, when I was pointing out if there is a conspiracy of the real rich, some group of people that are so rich that they're running the world and we don't know it. The point is you'll never know it. right? You can see that. If it's not the ones that you've heard of, and it's the ones that are so rich that the ones you've heard of are runners, peons, then you got to consider, well, I'll never know it. You're right. Now back to reality. If reality is a conspiracy, at any ordinary level at which you want to analyze it, argue with it, criticize it, try and kick it around, what the hell do you think you're doing? What if reality is a conspiracy? The reality you see is the Rockefellers. It's the Mellons, the Dodges, the Fords. And if there is a conspiracy of the rich, using that still just an example, then the ones I just named, they're just foot soldiers. So you'll never see the real one. And many of you, when I did this 4 or 5 minutes ago, just then you go, yeah, that's true. I can see that, in theory. If I can see what you're saying if it were true. If there was such a thing. But then nobody considers, well, what I call reality, I would never be able to see through. I can criticize it. Well, hell yeah, you can go out, and picket Chase Manhattan or whichever Rockefeller bank it is, and holler, down with the Rockefellers or the Rothschilds or somebody. You can do that any time you want to. In fact, if there's a conspiracy, the conspirators, if they don't have anything to do or they begin to feel a little pressure, they may send out some of the Rockefeller in-laws and say, go out there and picket the Rockefeller bank. Get public pressure back on, the people that are meaningless, our employees. You understand? They can take the pressure off itself. But nobody ever looks at reality that way. You never consider that reality makes me a critic of reality. Nah, I'm too smart. Nah, I have a very critical mind, says a man. In fact, I used to have some artistic talent. I could write if I wanted to. In fact, some of the stuff you're talking about, I've thought about that stuff. Life doesn't fool me. Really? And suddenly the man's got a thing in his hand. It's a picket sign. He's saying, down with local reality. Now, you don't fool me for a minute. And if you tried to look at the man and go, where'd you get that sign? What motivated you to come out here? Of course, you actually did it. He'd have an answer like, my insight. My ability not to be fooled. Man doesn't know that the real conspirators told the Rockefellers to tell their cousin who he is, and he's not really aware of it, to go picket their bank. Well, I decided enough's enough. I'm tired of these rich people running the world. March, march, march with your sign. And you don't realize who sent you there, if that was you. If you do, then you understand also, those of you that need any further prodding, my criticism is, at the very best, nothing. Now, what I was trying to say is a waste of time, but it's not even that. Because if you're alive, it's not a waste of time. It helps kill time. It gets you closer, you got another 30 or 40 years to, you'll live. So hell, criticize it. Just remember who you're working for. That is, you don't know who you're working for. Now, I'm working for my own insight, my own understanding. Right, go ahead.
Anything you can see is not, oh dear, a conspiracy.
I was going to say that.
The simple are civilized once, the complex a second time. The simple are local, the complex universal. The simple deal in specifics, the complex in the ecumenical. The simple are always uncertain, while the complex just grow increasingly so, and hungrier as well.
If things don't look worse the older you get, you ain't gotten old enough. Old enough yet.
There is always another explanation for everything. Everything can be explained in a way it never has been. Thus is real thinking hereby described anew.
At the physical level, man must struggle to merely survive. But how translates this at the intellectual?
Civilization, the movable ritual.
The explorer's job of spotting new lands amidst the public seas of confusion is not made any easier by him complaining about the splinters on deck of the ship they sent him out on.
Well, I almost can't resist. If you had any picture of that, I would submit that that is exemplary of the conspiracy idea also, in the full sense. But, part was, right at the end, was sort of the punchline. Well, there were several, but the way it was written, it said that an explorer out attempting to find new lands on the general confused sea of public, or the public seas. That is, you're in life, and you believe sincerely that you are searching for something that doesn't seem to be normally available. You know, the waves up and down, and people arguing, and sometimes you feel good, and sometimes you feel bad. Sometimes people seem as though they're civilized, sometimes not. And there you are, let's say on the bow of the ship, it's best, at least your own little ship, and you keep searching. And it points out that the job's not made any easier by you complaining about the splinters on deck. That keep getting in your feet, obviously, which we've got several punchlines, if you were following that. That the job's not made any easier. There you are trying to do it, but imagine the annoyance. I mean, splinters annoy anyone. But there you are trying to do something important, discover new land, and you're out there and the ship's tossed around, and, heavy-duty adventure, and you're complaining about splinters in your feet, which I know are irritating, we all know that, but think about the dichotomy of here you are attempting to do something great and extraordinary, and it's all the time you're complaining about the splinters on your feet, third punchline, on deck of the ship that they sent you out on. All right, the ship they provided. See, a joke without, a news story without three punchlines, I don't know. I don't think it's our kind of news story.
When the old man came home and opened his shirt to reveal the new tattoo that proclaimed, "There is nothing human that is alien to me," the kid punched his sister and said, "Uh-oh, we're in for it now."
Real private thinking is never aggressive, critical, insulting, or injurious to anybody.
If you think about that, and if it were true, do you realize what that does to most ordinary thought? Most of the thought you ever had in your life? And as you know, there is no even insinuated morality, religious view, any particular view at all. It was just a statement that it's not real thinking if it does any of that. But then think back, just ordinary thinking, even when you think it's at your best, even what would appear to be philosophical or religious or humane thinking out in the public area. Is any of it exempt from that, ordinarily? What does that do to almost all just routine thinking? If it's not critical, aggressive, and sort of the extreme, as I put in there, is injurious. And of course that doesn't mean physically, we're talking about intellectual matters, but insulting, sarcastic, something that makes somebody feel bad. Of course, you're ordinary, you can say, well, that's for their own good, or maybe it'll help them. Don't know what we'd do without the saints of the world, especially intellectual saints. I just was going to ask you the musical question to consider. What does that do if that were a fact? If that was an ordinary fact, what does that do with just about all thinking? Don't everybody look at the dumpster first? At the same time.
Worrying about being human will keep you that way.
At every moment, it's almost like life gives you a choice. You can, in some way or another, be aggressive and edgy as you ride the old survival train, or relax and look out as you take her up higher, the aerobatic neural plane.
At all times, in all places, there is always another reality. And from ordinary views, not necessarily a better one or a more correct one, just another one.
Sarcastic people are simple people. Simple people are boring people. Come, my little cupcake, and let me yawn into that fashionable face. Petting a sick dog will often cause it to snap at you.
Anyone who, there are at least 3 wrap-ups to that news story, or punchlines, but I thought at least any of you ever feel as though you're having almost uncontrollable desires to become a saint, become extremely charitable. I just thought you might like to remember, because even if the first part was too poetic, the last line in there was petting a sick dog will very often make it snap at you. Of course, anybody gets good, you might consider you trying to pet your own hormonal system. Oh, poor old me, I don't feel good. You can take it from there.
No honor amongst thinkers. No honor at all.
All right. I don't know whether, did you even understand it by reading it? If there were a group of thinkers, if there was some group of people, and we'll get to an individual very quickly because this is of no importance, but the way it was written, if you had a group of people and they were actually thinkers, the whole idea of some kind of mystical group of guys and women somewhere, actually off on some mystical quest, attempting something extraordinary. If there's no honor among them, there's no honor in life. And by honor, understand what I mean. If there's no trust, no integrity, all the ordinary things that people talk about. If you were a thinker, you wouldn't have to talk about it necessarily. But in the true, widest sense of honor, if there's no honor among thinkers, there's no honor at all. Moving very quickly, even closer to individuals, don't get hung up because this is not a social commentary. But you could also look at, just in passing, my description of thinkers, you could look at it metaphorically, God forbid, but you could, as the heart of the civilized. That is, if the most civilized of any area, of any era, of any segment of life, if there's no honor among them, then there's not, if there's no honor among the Rockefellers and the bankers and the visible leaders, just using the ordinary terminology, if there's no honor there, then there's certainly not going to be any honor amongst us ordinary bricklayers and drywall men and plumbers and hairdressers, right? That's easy enough to say. Now, beyond all that, if there is no honor to what you think, if you don't consider that there's anything honorable about what you think, then any idea you got in some way of being honorable in life is a French horn. That sounds better than, well, it's a bassoon, I'm going to think. It's the ghost of Verdi. Well, it gets awfully close to sounding moralistic, even us talking about it. But there is a kind of honor to what you think. Put another way, there's a kind of dishonor if you think ordinary thoughts and take them as being you. If you take regular, aggressive, partisan, prejudiced, biased ideas, which everybody has. So we don't hold a vote. Like, has anyone here actually ever had some kind of real hostile, negative, biased idea go through their mind? Would you hold your hand? Yeah. We're not that hard up for a hobby hour. We don't have to kill time and stretch the clock. But if you do not understand that, just you personally, not to make anybody else happy, because it has to be honor amongst thinkers. And if you're going to look out there, you're wasting your time. I just made up the thing about a group of thinkers. You knew that. There is no group of thinkers. It's you. If there is no honor amongst thinkers, forget the idea that there's any honor at all. Which, of course, you can do that will relieve you of any responsibility in life. That wasn't the point, but at least you can try and rip off your clothes and become a naked grizzly bear again. It won't work, but you can do it and not worry about the consequences. And, of course, I got a brother-in-law that's a Baal's bondsman. If you like, I'll pass out cards after this is over.
The murder of minds in the public forum is not considered a felonious act. Nay, it is the personal intrigues of private minds that troubles the spirit of the marketplace.
The murder of minds in the public forum is not a felonious act. After hearing this, after I wrote it, you suddenly can you think of as many as I can just immediately of the stories all the way from in the Western world Caesar and what happened to him in the public Senate. The murder of man's mind in a public forum, out in the middle of a herd, is not considered murder. Nobody ever calls it murder. I had another story I don't think I ever brought, because I don't know what that there was some father, I'll make it brief, that ended up, he'd sent his kid to school finally, like the first grade or kindergarten. Within 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 hours, I forget how it went, he was over at the school ready to whip every teacher and principal's ass. Really, all right, after the first day, make it a little sense. The next day, he's over at school ready to whip somebody's ass on the basis that they're trying to murder his kid's mind. But we're talking about the educational process. And I'm not picking out some specific educational system like we're picking on the American or the Georgia or the New York school system. No. Anywhere in the world. Because in a sense, as soon as your mind can think, as soon as Jehovah said, "Get thee from the garden, Ken," he could think. That was his first education. Was to take instructions like a good dog should. Get a picket sign and get out of here. Go get a job. Hit the road, Jack. And he did. After that, it's almost a matter of murder. That is what collective thinking is. It is a constant chipping, a constant hitting, a constant refining, and it's all a matter of an assault on what a man might think. That if the mind indeed was free and you could just suddenly look around and you could in some way naturally involve yourself in plain thought and point blank talk, that you could just look at things, civilization would not be what it is. And so in one sense, you have to constantly be confined. Life itself has to constantly come by. It's almost like wranglers, and if you start straying away from the herd, somebody has to hoot and holler or stick a sheepdog on you or hit you with a whip, look at you funny, send out gamma rays with their eyes, public pressure. But in one real sense, there is a continual series of small murders, small continual assaults, but an actual murder of a man's mind, which in a sense happens once you've given up. That's why I've been talking about that you can actually be intellectually dead at the age of 21 and go ahead and live for another 40, 50 years. But when you are murdered in public, in the public forum, nobody considers it a crime. Nay, not hardly. But what they are disturbed by, if it got out of hand, are private intrigues. That's what worries the public forum. They don't mind a man coming out in public. If he'll come out and say something, they can always kill him. And if they don't kill him, they can frighten him. I mean, a Galileo, if you want to jump from Greece to Italy, can come out with almost unacceptable thinking for some particular time and place in a group of people. In this case, it was primarily the church. All history, it's not important, but says, "We know how to handle people like you." And he suddenly realized, "I'll be damned if you don't." He didn't have any doubt about it. And they said, "We think that you should publicly commit suicide. You should recount what you said about your support of Kepler and the movements of heavenly bodies that conflicts with church belief." And he went, "I see your point." And he did. See, it was murder in a public place, and that's acceptable. But if it had stayed as a private intrigue, and it normally does not happen. We're again playing my kind of game of having it both ways. I'm describing how things are and how they might be. That if you did have a group of thinkers, and they were thinking independently, and they were not confined by, nor frightened by, not just physical fear, but they were not pressured by ordinary reality, and it started getting out of hand, that's what disturbs the public forum. That's what disturbs the peace of the city. That is what public pressure will put an end to. Or for those of you who majored in you know what, that's the sort of thing to which public pressure will put an end. That and people who end their propositions and penances. People that just have slight cases of selected eczema. It is also not unrelated, you might notice, to being dressed in public, even if you are a grizzly bear, while being naked underneath. that the public forum states its policies, and you happen to find yourself there, you're on the way to something important, you were looking for a music festival or some red beans and rice, and you suddenly stumbled in this great political or religious rally, and you heard what was going on, everybody went, "Hear, hear." If you were a thinker, your fist would be right up there with them, just in case. But underneath, you're just naked, and nobody knows it. If it is the only thing that's of any benefit, I put it in there that the only thing that what scares the public, what frightens civilization and stability and order is private intrigues. And private intrigues never get out of hand. But the point is, if you do not have your own private intrigues, what you're engaged in is a form of suicide yourself. That is, if you take the public ideas seriously, then you're out there actually doing it, going here, here. And you know it doesn't matter. As they're going here, here, you can take your other hand and go. It's the same thing. You're out there playing with them. You're taking it seriously. You're out there doing a grizzly bear dance, and they can say, well, it didn't say tuxedos. It said cutaways. It said formal. And so you can think, well, I'm a rebel. You're not a rebel if you're out there taking it seriously. You're still out there doing a damn bear dance in clothes and a hairdo, even though you can holler, I don't like the music. But if you're out there, you're part of it. And you're part of the public killing, the public murder of your own mind. In this case, you call it suicide. You've got to have your own your own private intrigue. That's the only thing that's dangerous. That's the only thing that's profitable. But it's got to be private.
Within routine civilization, habit becomes almost sacred.
Well, for those of you that really consider yourself advanced listeners and thinkers, you may strike the word almost.
The simple live a life of pseudo-complexity, while the truly enriched lead one of plain talk and point-blank thought.
In the city, men with no originality are always a bit pissed. A holdover from jungle days.
That means I'm about to say something. I think. Well, here's one at least we've never covered in this particular way. A man with no originality. We could say a man with no talent, a man with no creative ability. And the thing is, I know that some of you may think that you have no musical talent or can't paint, but if you can think, if any of this makes any sense, you do have some sort of originality. You just do, and I'm not trying to make you feel good. Oh, all right, I am. I hope it didn't work. If it did, shame on you. But think about the way I put it this time, that in the city, that is just under ordinary conditions, civilized conditions under which we are all born and under which everyone grew up, that a man with no originality always is a bit pissed. And I meant that a little more. That's why I use the word, not just to get a cheap laugh. I could have said aggressive, dissatisfied, but then you've got to remember, we've already pointed out that anyone who is intellectually alive and civilized is dissatisfied. That is the nature of what keeps human life going beyond the survival level, is being dissatisfied. That the neural system in man is the open-ended one. Everything else is completed. Everything else is working just fine. Thank you. You're welcome. But it's this that is incomplete. It is this that can apparently be fed, and this that can apparently change. If we go from the collective description of man being incomplete and dissatisfied, the civilization itself is on a quest. The civilization itself is attempting to complete, fulfill, develop further the intellectual system of humanity. But if we go from that to an individual, to a person, then you can describe it, which when I stopped is the first time I'd ever tried it this way, that if the individual is not in some way original, he is going to stay dissatisfied to the point that I wanted to take it a little further than just a normal dissatisfaction of, well, I know that I ate somewhere and I wish I could scratch it. It almost makes a man, in sort of an unusual way, kind of, really red-assed. But now turn it around. That if you're not attempting, since I already tried to give you credit that if you're interested in such as this, you've got some originality. There's something creative in you individually. And it doesn't have to be an actual recognizable manifestation in the plastic or performing arts. But there is some originality. And so if you turn it around another way, if you're not attempting to exercise some originality, what are you left with? You're left with being out there in the public forum and them all hollering, let's all do the grizzly bear, which, for those of you who don't know it, was a double barrel. Not on a grizzly bear picture, but there used to be a dance called a grizzly bear. They can holler, all right, we're going to do the Eagle Rock. And all the grizzly bears go holler, I'm not going to do a dance with another animal. See, there was another dance. At any rate, if you're out in the public forum, you can either be agreeing or shaking your fist at them. What kind of originality is that? With the ordinary, that's about what it gets to, is why I continue to try and get you to consider the folly of sarcasm and criticism. Because what is normal, what passes for originality, at least half the time. For all of the actual arts in the city, you've got as many critics, you've got as many, whether they be professional or not, critics for all the arts as you do the artists or the supporters. You've got to. That passes for originality. They describe critics literally as somebody who writes on heavy metal music, a whole new subgenre of a man who specializes in the deconstruction, the intellectual, the mystical, the mythical interpretation and criticism of heavy music metal as played in Scotland in the 80s. Talking about real specialized. Well, I went through all that enough that you say, now, we're talking about some originality there. Think about it. Being a smartass passes for being original. Or somebody that's famous comes on, and it's not just limited to an artist or a rock band of some kind. It could be could be a politician, could be a socialist, sociologist, a psychologist, and somebody comes up and says, "Here is my great new opinion," and he has a wide following, a book out, big seller, and you can say, your whole idea is insane. You're nuts. You'd have to probably do a little better than that. Give it a little more thought than that. But it amounts to the same thing, and the critic himself will be described in terms having to do with his originality, his novel approach to the criticism of contemporary psychology, or whatever. That's not originality. If it's public, it's not original. And if it's public, you're always going to be, to some degree, unsettled, dissatisfied, a bit pissed. Except ordinary people never understand why. Even people who try to think, if they try to stick it out in the public forum, never understand why. They're never satisfied. Their description is, well, I'm on the verge. I'm sure I understand more than the average person. I try to talk to people, and they just ignore me. It's a short step from that to, well, God damn them. Well, screw them people. What's wrong with them? And even if you're not paid, you can become almost a critic. Like, not only do I see more than everyone else. Seymour was not Moses' agent, for those of you who are asking. Not only do I see more than everybody else, but now I begin to see how little they do know at another level because they won't recognize what I see. In case you'd like to try and conjure up your own picture right quick of a cow attempting to look original. It's just stepped in somebody else's shit and did this and trying to look like, kind of aloof, superior. So as not to step it any further, we bid you adieu. Would a cow say adieu?